Welcome to Closing the Security Gap in AI, a roundtable discussion with industry experts sponsored by Security Journey. I'm Pete Golden, editor and publisher of DevOps Digest, a DevOps and development community blog, and I will be moderating the roundtable. Today's software development is facing an AI security dilemma. Speed to market's always a key objective, and AI can help by accelerating software development efforts. The dilemma is that while delivering these advantages, AI can introduce a variety of new security risks and vulnerabilities. How do we find the right balance between speed and security in the age of AI? Currently, there is no official guidance on AI security, and while President Trump's executive order marks a pivotal shift in national cybersecurity strategy as it places secure software development front and center, it still does not stretch far enough, and AI breaches continue to rise. Time is of the essence, and this roundtable will be discussion surrounding why developers need to have a key role in navigating the evolving AI security threat landscape, and more importantly, how. Now I'll introduce our panelists. Let's start with Chris Lindsay. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi guys, my name is Chris Lindsay and I have 35 years of software development, so that comes in very handy on these kind of conversations. I also built an application security program from the ground up, ran it for 3 years for a very large enterprise, which also, again, helps for these kind of conversations. I do a lot of traveling, speaking, a lot of events, so I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Our next panelist is Gavin Klondike.
Hey, what's going on? My name is Gavin. By day, I'm a principal security consultant specializing in penetration testing on applications, AI, and cloud. By night, I am an AI researcher. I've done a lot of work. I actually used to be on the leadership board for the AI Village. We did a lot of partnerships with DEF CON. I actually wrote 2 of the OWASP top 10 for large language model applications. And I share everything that I know on my YouTube channel, NetSec Explained. So check it out.
The next panelist is Dustin Lair.
Oh man, I have to follow Gavin with all of his amazing credentials. So first of all, super excited to be here and to be here amongst friends. I think this is going to be a fantastic discussion. Like Chris, I was also a software engineer for many years, moved into AppSec leadership roles at various companies, and now I do a lot of things. So I'm an AppSec advocate for Security Journey. That's a lot of thought leadership, content generation, and so forth. Co-founded a company, Catalyst, and then I also run an open discussion meetup called Let's Talk Software Security, and I do various consulting. I also make some silly videos from time to time if you want to check those out. So super excited to be here.
And our fourth panelist, Mike Birch.
Hey, my name is Michael Birch. I have enough time as a developer to be a little dangerous and a lot of time in security, delving into application security. I'm currently the director at Security Journey and actually co-host the Security Champion podcast with Dustin Lair.
Great. Well, the first question is for Gavin, and after we hear from Gavin, the other panelists are welcome to offer their opinions as well. Gavin, now that AI is already embedded across the tools and platforms we use, Slack, Microsoft, Zoom, even our code bases, how is that changing the way we think about governance?
So I think that's a really good question. And first, I kind of want to define governance in this context. Usually when we think about governance, I think about trying to get an idea of what's in our environment. And that includes things like defining what is AI, who can use AI, how is it monitored, and what risks are involved in that. Now, the tricky thing with this is that, once upon a time, we used to be able to lock down what people can install in their local systems. But now, with AI just being a simple website, right? You can go to ChatGPT or Claude or even Google. Now you can just go to a website, say we lock that down. These apps are being pushed into everything that we use today, right? We have Slack AI, Notion AI, Microsoft 360 AI. So we have a hole in our wall and we need to figure out what to do with it from there. So when it comes to that, what I say is you need to educate your workforce into what are the risks with AI, how to properly use AI, and then what is and is not appropriate to use AI for.
So one of the interesting things that I've run into is as I go around and I speak at the events, I always ask the question, how many of you guys have policies against the usage of AI internally? And there's so many companies that say, hey, we're going to block everything. And so what happens, I always ask the audience, how many of you guys have policies that block AI? And there are several out there that say, hey, we block AI. Okay, fine. If you're blocking AI, what are your developers doing? So then I turn around and I ask the developers, do you guys copy the source code down to a thumb drive, take it home, plug it into your home computer, use AI to get some of the information you're looking for, bring it back to work and plug it back in? Hands usually go up. And even last night, I saw someone like, yeah. So one of the things when you're looking at the policies and governance is if you're being too strict and if you're just kind of putting your foot down too heavily on it, your developers are going to find ways around your system.
Yeah, to put a finer point on that, people are going to be using it. These tools are way too useful to be ignored. And that's kind of where it's important for us to share, hey, we know you're using it. We know it's in our environment. Here's the appropriate ways and here's the inappropriate ways, because a lot of people don't really understand the risks or inherent biases. The thing that I'm specifically concerned about is using it for important decisions or regulated decisions. So think of HR decisions, right? How do we do employee reviews? How do we promote? How do we hire? How do we fire? The thing that I personally want to avoid is I'm not racist. The machine told me to do it because of some inherent biases in these systems.
If you think you've done your job just because you've set policies around AI, you're not quite there yet. We're going to talk a lot about culture, specifically later in this discussion. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. Culture eats policy for breakfast as well. If you really want to see different behaviors, you need to think about incentives. You need to think about exactly how we're going to be enforcing those policies. So I'm excited to get more into detail there because I do think that is the key. And I think a lot of companies, a lot of security teams specifically will set a policy and sort of be done. We set a policy, we're good now, right? But that doesn't really capture the actual behavior happening at the company.
Well, and how many policies? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So one of the things I would say here too is I think the first thought around governance when we're starting to approach this problem is a lot of people are coming out there and like, oh my gosh, everybody's using AI in my company. There is a lot of companies that understand that risk. I talk to a lot of clients. They're like, yeah, AI is dangerous. We need to get policies out right now to make sure that we're controlling how it's used. But sometimes that's kind of the knee-jerk reaction. The policy needs to be in place, but it needs to be really thoughtful, right? And one of the first things that I think people are doing is they're putting out policy without actually understanding their environment. Like the first step, the beginning, before you even start saying, this is what we're going to do, well, how about you take a step back and be like, what are we doing right now? How is it being used? Is it helping productivity? Now let's start putting policy around what we're doing to make it better, not just halt everything we're doing, because we get a way better reception. Quite often, I think in security, we're seen as the stoppers, the blockers, the people in the way. It's because a lot of times we knee jerk, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, we have to put a SaaS tool and you have to fix every single vulnerability that comes through. Okay, well, hold on. Let's be a little bit more prescriptive and thoughtful about how we approach the problem. Policy, governance, super important. But let's do it in a very thorough manner so we get it embraced, not ignored.
Yeah, I think this comes down to, meeting people where they are. I just want to emphasize this point, Chris, and then we'll go straight to you. Meeting people where they are, right? Like understanding what is happening in your culture. What are the behaviors that you are seeing? And then setting policy according to that to sort of bring them from point A to point B. I see this a lot with like SLAs with vulnerability management programs. Okay. People are fixing highs in 6 months. Cool, great. Let's set the policy to 7 days. Makes no sense. You have to sort of, meet people where they are, like bring them back to that over time. And I think the same thing is true here with AI.
Well, in two parts to that. The program that I used to be in charge of took 3 weeks to go through QA. So when you're looking at the policies, every team is going to be unique and different. So you can't just set a one policy rules all. And then the other thing that you run into as well is how many policies are outdated and never reviewed. And so you also need to have some kind of cycle where you're going back and adjusting your policy as things change. AI is relatively new, but it's been out now for about 1.5 years, 2 years, more mainstream. And you look at how far and how fast. 2 years ago, we didn't have Cursor, Windsurf, and the other tools that we have today that can do vibe coding. Now we do, and they're readily available amongst others.
Great. Let's stay on the theme of governance for a minute. The next question will be for Chris. What do you think governance should look like as part of an AI roadmap? I mean, whose responsibility is it?
So the responsibility is really kind of a multi-tier. First off, you need to really look at it from a high-level company standpoint. What risks do you want the company to have? And when you're looking at the risks from a board of directors, CEO level down, you really need to start there. But you also need to look at down to the teams. What's acceptable from the security team? What are they comfortable with? If they're not comfortable with something, what can you do to get them comfortable? Because if you're not looking at the developers and the security folks being comfortable, they're just going to circumvent the process anyway. And so when you're building the AI roadmap, be transparent with all your teams, with your security teams, your development teams, because when they see, hey, we are working towards this, we're going there, here's where we expect to be in, today, 1 month, 2 months, down the road, 6 months, even 12. Because AI isn't necessarily just the tools you use, but it's also the integrations into your own systems that you have. And so if you're actually adding AI capabilities within your system, you also need to be looking at what kind of guardrails and what kind of things that we have around that. So it's a multi-tier.
Yeah, you brought up the concept of risk tolerance, right? I do think it's important to understand how AI can and should be used in the context of your unique business. It's not like you can just steal or borrow, right, from some other company's policy. Be thoughtful, right? Think about how it applies specifically to your situation.
Man, I would like to call out here too, though, is I think we have a FOMO that's like out there. And then when we think about governance, we have to like reel back on our fear of missing out, right? And part of that is, and I do a workshop at NC State and a couple other areas I've done this, the whole discussion is not every problem is an AI problem. So as we're doing governance, part of that checklist of what we're thinking about is, as we're thinking about where we're integrating AI, we should have some strict criteria that says, hey, is this an AI problem or not? And what does that mean for us? And that shouldn't just be, once again, just like you said, Dustin, it's not based on, well, every organization can follow these same things. What's an AI problem is different for a local mom and pop coffee shop than it is for a large enterprise. It makes sense to integrate it in different areas. I don't know if the mom and pop shop really needs an AI generated chatbot, but maybe some enhancement there for a larger enterprise could really increase productivity with the right data set behind it.
Yeah, I've always said you want to use these AI tools to augment your thinking, not outsource your thinking. And unfortunately, we've seen a troubling trend of companies trying to go AI first because of that fear of missing out, right? Oh, well, if we're not first, then we're last. So let's be an AI first company. And then you see what happened to Duolingo. There was also, the name escapes me, but there was also that financial company that fired 400 employees, tried to be AI first and realized AI can't do everything. And now they're struggling to rehire after already losing all the goodwill of any potential employees that they could bring on board.
IBM was one of those 8,000 people.
Yeah,
there you go.
Then they just rehired them about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
This baffles me. I don't know where that comes from in terms of just, this is the new hot trend. Let's just take action overnight to make sure that we take advantage of this, as opposed to really thinking through it or experimenting with it, doing some tests up front, getting the advice from the people using it to figure out how is this going to look going forward.
I think I might be able
time, obviously, to sort all that stuff out, but I would love to see more leaders. It just surprises me. So many sort of high tech company leaders would pursue this, without really taking the time to analyze the impacts.
I think I might be able to fill in some blanks there because we saw this exact same thing with the first 2 AI winters that we had, which I wish more people could look into AI winters, what caused them and what happened. But each time we saw this boom and bust cycle of, oh, this technology is brand new. It's AI. It's going to be everywhere. It's going to do everything. My favorite example is actually fuzzy logic. Fuzzy logic was a form of AI, and now you can find fuzzy logic in essentially 2 places. There's one subway that uses it to determine how much power to give to the wheels based on how many people are actually in the subway car. And the other one is rice cookers. At one point, we thought this was going to be a revolutionary technology that was going to be everywhere and take over the world. But surprise, surprise. And I think that ChatGPT first opened the doors to the private sector outside of the public sector. And it's advanced so quickly because we had GPT 3.5, which is the original ChatGPT. That was November 2022. That February, we had Ollama. That February, we had Llama 2 or Llama coming out of Meta. That April, we had GPT-4. That summer, we had GPT-4o. Next spring, we have GPT-o1, the first reasoning model. And then even all the way back to this January, we have DeepSeek R1, which is a reasoning model at a fraction of the cost. You could run it locally, and it competes with GPT-o1. And that's not even to talk about, Google Gemini or Claude or any of the other models that are out there. So I think that CEOs are seeing this technology advance so quickly that if you just turn off your X or Blue Sky or news source of whatever for 3 days, you're already 6 weeks out of date.
One thing
I think
I'll let you go, Dustin.
I do think that ChatGPT made it a lot more accessible, right, for end users. It's really funny because I'm rereading a book right now, one of my favorites, Crossing the Chasm, and it was written a long time ago, and it talks about one of those points in time where AI was going to become the new big thing, and it talks specifically about in the past why the AI technology failed because they couldn't necessarily package it up for the customers in the 90s. It's just so funny reading that right now and then seeing everything happening when it comes to AI currently.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd love to draw this back to the original question, though, right? And that goes back to whose responsibility. And I think we really drove home one of the biggest gaps we have of some of the people with most power around how AI is going to affect your organization are probably some of the least educated on what AI is and how it actually works. And that's why we're seeing a lot of these crazy trends where AI is being tried to replace things or put in places that it shouldn't, and you're having these large firings and stuff. I think one of the biggest, it's a top-down problem, in my opinion. And the saddest part, I think, is the people at the bottom, right, are often the ones that have the most understanding education about this technology compared to the people at the top making all the decisions that are actually impacting your organization around this, right? So I think there's a huge responsibility for the people that are leading organization. It is your responsibility to become educated on this. It's going to be like the new coding, right? I have a kid in school who's taking software development classes in middle school, right? It's part of just the new norm. Well, guess what? AI is going to be the new business norm. If not every person in your organization at least has a fundamental education understanding how AI works, you're not going to be able to make smart decisions around it.
Something we should introduce into this conversation is also the impact of privacy. I think this is one of the few technologies that have existed where now there's we cannot decouple privacy from AI. As it is, if you're using like an online model, so that'll be something like OpenAI's GPT models, Claude, Google Gemini, right? You want to make sure you're not putting proprietary information out because they're using that information that you send to these models to train the next version of their model. When ChatGPT first came out, Samsung actually had a bit whoopsie where they, the developers themselves actually put proprietary code into ChatGPT. And it wasn't until people started pulling proprietary Samsung code out of ChatGPT that they realized like, oh shit, maybe we should lock this down a little bit more. Okay. Another thing that we should enter into the conversation is the way that we use some of these tools. I kind of hinted at it earlier, right? I'm not racist. Machine told me to do it, but also making regulated decisions. So that'll be things in the financial industry and the legal industry and the health industry. There was that lawyer, and unfortunately he's kind of famous now because he had ChatGPT write a legal brief for him. It looked absolutely beautiful. But unfortunately, most of the cases that it cited actually didn't exist. And of the ones that did exist, it drew incorrect conclusions. And that's where we all collectively found out at the same time, anything that you submit into a court filing is considered under oath. And to submit fictitious information is perjury. And so he lost his bar license. And, that was back in 2023, but we still haven't learned our lesson because the current administration, and I'm not diving into the politics of this, but I'm highlighting something very important. We had RFK Jr. and his organization under the CDC actually push out a study, quote unquote, where most of the studies that it cited were also fake. And so I think this is going to start to become kind of the new normal. And if you're a business, you want to be aware of that. One more thing that I want to add that nobody really thinks about is if another company, not you because you're very smart, if another company puts in proprietary information or copywritten information, something that belongs to their intellectual property, and you use AI to generate your own proprietary technology or copyrightable information, are you accidentally, unintentionally trampling over their intellectual property rights? And that's something that we need to be aware of as we're using these tools.
You bring up a good point, because I ask frequently at some of my talks, okay, if you use AI to generate your entire application, who owns the rights to it? You can look at the actual design and architectural as far as this is our idea, but what about the code? Who really owns the code? If it's pulled from all these different sources. Now, if you go look at, ChatGPT, Claude, and those guys, they're going to say that they'll back you up even in court, and which I find kind of laughable. Because
absolutely not. Yeah.
I actually have an opinion you might not like about this. And so I'm going to throw it in here. When I think about ChatGPT and it writes codes for us, if I build an application, I want to ask you real quick, out of all the boilerplate packages and other packages I get from third parties, how much code did I actually write in that application versus the percent of code that's actually in it? Do I not own that entire application? I took it from all these other sources that are publicly available online that I get, even though I might have only written 20% of the actual real code that's being implemented. I have thousands of packages in the background that somebody else wrote that I'm using. I see ChatGPT the same way. Once again, but the moment I put it in my application, I have ownership, but I also have responsibility, right? And I have ownership in a way that means I'm responsible for that code. Because you get the other side of this coin, and people say, well, ChatGPT wrote it. It's not my vulnerability. No, the moment you hit I accept and you publish that ChatGPT written code, it's like a third-party library. Just because you use a third-party library doesn't make you any less liable when your app gets breached. Same thing with ChatGPT code. I do believe you have ownership, right? I do believe that. And I think there's some ethical concerns about that. But at a fundamental level, when I add it to my application, it's like a third-party part of my application that I'm using. I have ownership, but I also have responsibility, and I have to own that when I have my ownership.
Yeah, which is based on the license agreement too, right? Of the third party code that you do incorporate. This is very, very governance related. It makes me think of the image generation concerns as well.
I was hoping you'd bring that up.
It's using input from other pieces of art that are essentially copyrighted material, right, from other artists. But what I would argue there is, when those artists created their material, were they not inspired by other existing art that was out there as well? So where do you draw the line exactly? And it's very difficult. We just have not sorted all this out yet.
Yeah, definitely a lot of open questions. A couple things that I would push back on is that there's definitely a difference between inspired by versus making essentially a collage, which is what these tools do. On top of that, we often fall into the trap of anthropomorphizing these technologies, right? Thinking of these technologies as people, as human, or in some cases, even as animals. And the current legal standing, especially around image generation, is that if AI generates the image, you can't copyright it. And that goes actually back to a court case where a monkey stole a photographer's camera, took a picture. The picture went viral, went very famous, and the photographer tried to claim copyright. But because he wasn't the one that actually took the picture, it was just his camera, the image itself was not copyrightable. And so the current legal standing as it is in June 2025 is that AI images are not copyrightable, which is another thing, right? If you're going to try and generate intellectual property with these tools, that you need to be aware of. What are the current legal standings around some of this technology? It's something that Michael pointed out, which I wish we could go into a little bit more detail is how comfortable we've become with shady business practices. So for example, you're going online, you're pulling code from places. I mean, there are countless examples of people taking open source code, ripping out the license, slapping their own name on it and calling it theirs. And that's just something that we've become accustomed to the point that when we have these conversations, we say, hey, how come I can't do that anymore? Because you shouldn't have been doing that in the first place.
Yeah.
Great. Let's talk about developer leadership now. Mike, let's start with you. What is the developer's responsibility in helping navigate the changing AI landscape?
To be honest, I have the thought that, and I have this bias here too. When I think about the developer, I often say that the developer is actually the largest part of our security team. We just don't acknowledge it. Because me as the security team, I'm not down in the code writing authentication. I'm not building the input validation. I'm not the one building the security. I'm just there to check the block to make sure you did it and help educate you and support you and test it and validate that you actually did your job as security. So as that, right, when we think about this, the developers are the lead of this, right? They're the ones going to be leveraging these tools to develop software. Our job as security team is to support them with education and make sure they have access to the right tools to use it the right way to do it well. But in the end, right, after we do that, it is the developer's role to use their tools appropriately and ethically and in the right way to develop the best product they can. There's massive productivity that can come from using AI. You can code faster. One of my favorite things, and I do this when I go through and I write software right now and I'm working on some side projects, is I don't like writing unit tests. Let's be honest. I just don't like doing it. But you know what? AI is really good at helping me rig that up real fast. And it's something that it's a really great use, I think, of AI. So those type of things is understanding, okay, when and how should you use these tools? At that developer, though, is owning the fact that, hey, it is my responsibility to use this tool the right way. And if I don't, I'm responsible for when it goes wrong.
Right. Well, one of the things that I run into frequently when I'm talking is a lot of people look at the tool and say, hey, the junior devs are going to run off and do it. The problem is junior developers don't understand that the code that's being generated is poor quality or insecure. And one of the things that I do in my talk is I actually ask AI to fix the security vulnerabilities identified with with what it created. And it will go out and say, hey, I found these things, and then it will go fix them. And you can do multiple cycles. And depending on the tools that you're using, like, for example, ChatGPT would fix things, but break things. And so what are you breaking when you're fixing things? And Claude is a lot better, but each one has its strengths and weaknesses. That's why even regardless, if you're looking at it saying, hey, does this meet my requirements? Does this, meet what I'm trying to do? Great. How secure is it? And so any code that comes through an AI generated system, my opinion, you should at least document it within the code. This area was generated through an AI tool. You should go through the same rigorous testing that you would normally do with any development, even senior developers, senior tech review. Validate, look at the things, and definitely run through enterprise tools, because the enterprise tools will find the security issues that GPTs won't.
You have a QA process for a reason. Exactly. Actually, as somebody who's on the end of that QA process, right? So I do penetration testing. I'm the one who's trying to see what can an attacker do. You built some code, looks really nice. Let's see if we give it an earthquake test and if it falls apart. I want to share something that I'm actually seeing out in the wild right now. And that's actually not specifically the AI generated code, but integrating AI into your applications. Unfortunately, I am consistently seeing, and this is true for bug bounty hunters and just kind of everybody across this industry right now, we are seeing, and this is important, we are seeing the last 20 years of cybersecurity lessons learned just being thrown out the window when it comes to integrating AI into these applications. How the AI systems are being built, right? What does your supply chain look like? How attackers are getting in when it comes to prompt injections or other things? What can they do once they get in? It is so ridiculous right now. And I'll give you a couple examples that the entire, we call it ML ops, very similar to DevOps. The entire ML ops pipeline is being developed without security in mind. There is right now a critical risk vulnerability, open CVE, that is being actively exploited on the internet that is well over a year old because one of the underlying systems that are being used to develop some of these softwares doesn't even come with authentication. The vendor themselves doesn't think that the authentication is their responsibility. They argue that there are other things that the users of their system should be putting on place or on top of it. But the users don't really understand that, hey, this is a problem and we should be concerned about it, right? Who's responsible for security? We all are. I'll give you an example, and this isn't to name and shame anybody, but DeepSeek R1. And this is just the latest example I have. So if you don't want to be on my list, please listen up. DeepSeek R1, it came out, it was revolutionary. It was back in January 2025, and it was a reasoning model that was developed for a fraction of the cost. It actually became one of the most downloaded apps on Android and on the Google Play Store in January within about a week. It took no more than a few hours for a security research team to compromise the entire database, get access to people's chats and personal information. Sorry, it wasn't personal information, but there was some identifying information. It's not quite at the level of PII, but it was big. It was big. And the reason is because it was an unauthenticated database publicly exposed to the internet. This is what I'm talking about. This is the level that we're at when it comes to integrating some of these AI tools into applications. And this is only the latest one that I've seen. There are many others. There are many other bug bounty reports around this as well. So please pay attention to your software bill of materials, pay attention to your ML ops flow, pay attention to how developers are building these systems, because when it comes to AI, these aren't modules like an NPM package that you can download, plug and play. It's like any other function and go. This is an entire other system that we need to think fundamentally different around. And from a security perspective, right? If you're into threat modeling, please do more threat modeling. From a security perspective, think of the LLM itself as an adversary, both to your internal system and also back to your users. I can't tell you how many times I've been able to get data exfiltration out of a large language model because it would render in a browser for users cross-site scripting, HTML and HTML image tags, markdown image tags. And now I can just pull out the entire conversation context that a user is using. I can trick the LLM through indirect prompt injection to convince the user that they're actually talking to a person or that they're talking to a trusted system. Give me your email, give me your password, give me your credit card information. And because things are automated, we implicitly trust it more than we would a human chatbot or a human chat interface, for example. So these are things that we need to be painfully aware of as we're developing some of these systems. And like I said, this is stuff that I'm finding in the wild right now. And I'm just sharing these lessons learned so that you don't fall victim to it, because I will bring you up as an example if I see you on the news.
Ooh, that's a threat.
It's a promise.
I mean, threat modeling, like, it has to go back to the fundamentals here. This is what blows my mind. There's a brand new technology. It's sort of like we should have a recipe, right? Brand new technology. Okay, go through this checklist and basically do the same things that we had to do and had to learn how to do when the last trend in technology was here. I definitely see the benefits of AI, though. Like, I've used it now personally. I think the best way to describe it from a developer's perspective is it helps address writer's block. Okay, one of the biggest issues, Chris, Mike, Gavin, let me know if you run into this too, but I think the hardest part when you're creating a new app, whatever it is just starting. Where do I even get started, right? So if you can use an AI assistant to help get some of those basic, infrastructure elements of your code set up, you're a lot farther down the road than you would be otherwise. And I think that is really helpful. But I also think, like Mike was saying originally, you are responsible, and you should be held accountable for the code that is written at the end of the day. So take responsibility to learn your craft. There's this professionalism that needs to go with being a developer that uses AI, and that's understanding. Take the time to actually understand what is being produced. Force yourself to learn, right? Because this is how you're going to grow. Right. There was a recent MIT study, I just brought this up yesterday as well, that showed that our cognitive ability is actually being affected the more that we use AI, which means more or less we're getting dumber the more we just depend on AI, unless we specifically take the time to learn what it's producing and challenge ourselves to go through, the trials that essentially lead us to more maturity, more wisdom when it comes to this stuff. So that's what I would encourage people to really think about here.
Well, and one thing I want to throw on here too is think about it this way. A lot of companies are saying, I want to hire a senior developer, or I want to hire a mid-tier developer or architect. But you know what? We don't need junior developers anymore. We have AI. At some point, where are we going to hit the point where you're like, okay, look, the junior guys are mentored. They're growing. They blossom into the senior guys. And the thing that a lot of people forget or they don't think about is the fact that when you're looking at AI does not understand, here is my coding standards. Now you can feed it some of that information, make it a little bit better. But the reality is when you start having AI generate all your stuff, you don't know what the coding standard is. You don't know where things are. You're going to run into a lot of problems. It's ignored because, oh, look, it's AI generated, so it should be good. And what happens is that domain knowledge is lost. And as it generates the code and gets it out there, then all of a sudden you're going to look back and go, look, we don't know. We don't know why it did this. We don't know why it created it this way. To your point, creating that good skeleton foundation is great. But if you're a senior developer, you can look at it and go, nope, try again. Junior guys are like, hey, it looks great. Let's run with it.
I mean, one of the things I like to call here too is I think a lot of organizations are like, wow, I can even get a junior developer for cheaper and I can augment them with AI and they can produce more, right? That's, I think, some of the mentality that we're getting in. And here's the really scary part about that is our talent pool is going to bottom out, and it's going to bottom out quick. And it goes right back to what Dustin said. What makes a junior developer become that senior developer? Man, it's fighting through and learning and working through problems that I have to critically evaluate and go through. If I'm just feeding it into ChatGPT and it solves a problem for me, especially if we're doing it in a shadow AI sense, which I think a lot of developers doing. If anyone doesn't have the context of that, shadow AI is all that AI being used that you're not aware of and don't understand that's being used. So it's the ones that's integrated in the tools that you don't know is actually AI. Or it's people using it often on their personal computer, like Chris brought up earlier, and solving the problem and then coming back. The problem with that is I never learn the solution. I think, oh, I read it. Okay, I see how I solved it. I got it. That's like doing math, right? I can't have ChatGPT answer my math problem. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. If I never take the time to practice my math problems, when the test comes around, I'm not going to be able to do it, right? So it's the same type of thing with this coding. I'm not actually learning. The learning cycle is part of that. Remembering is me having to fight through the problem myself. And I think we're going to lose that. And I don't think this is a problem we can stop. I think this is going to happen. And I'm really interested to see how this is going to affect our organizations over the next 5 years, the next 10 years, as the talent pool is going to change on what people can actually do and what they bring to the table as their own skills.
So you know what? I'm gonna attempt to coin a term here because I like the idea of calling this a valley. Talent valley is coming. Mm-hmm. Okay. There's going to be a point where people are going to demand high quality senior engineers, and they're not going to be there because there was an over dependence on AI. 5 to 10 years. What do you guys think?
I think when it comes to 5 to 10 years, I mean, we're not seeing companies last more than 6 weeks right now. You mentioned IBM. I mentioned Duolingo. There's other companies that tried to do this whole AI first. Look, if you want to replace your junior engineers with AI, cool, go ahead. If you're comfortable with slop as code, cool, more power to you. But if you want to do things right and you want to make quality software and quality products, don't do that.
Yeah, and I say 5 to 10 years because, and it could be frankly longer than that, only because I'm thinking generationally. Like what happens when the more senior engineers who fought for this knowledge over time, who did not over depend on AI, retire. And now the new workforce is coming in that potentially does have this over reliance on AI. And that's when I would predict that we would see this talent shortage or talent valley.
Something that I'm worried about is because a lot of especially when it comes to code, a lot of these AI tools are trained off of Stack Overflow and code documents and things like that. Stack Overflow has lost quite a bit of its own user share because of this. If a new language comes out? And we have new languages that have come out fairly recently, right? You look at Go, you look at Rust, they're fantastic languages. Let's create a new language. And now there's no more Stack Overflow. There's nowhere else to go. And these AI tools can't help you troubleshoot because they don't know what code examples look like. So I think, in 5 to 10 years, it's probably something that we're going to see more of, and we're going to need to find a new incentive. In the past, developers would help developers because they were really passionate about coding. But now that hey, anything that I post online anywhere can now be put into a large language model and sold for profit. Why would I give something like this out freely?
Well, and that's why you see a lot of people poisoning the models.
Exactly.
When Stack Overflow, when people realized that ChatGPT was scanning their information, and then even made an agreement, hey, you can scan us. The problem was developers were like, look, I helped this other person. Where's my money? And so exactly like you were saying. So then they turned around, they poisoned the data. So now all of a sudden the GPT models have to know, is this good data, clean data, bad data? And you start going into the AI downward spiral where, bad data is seeping in, and then all of a sudden it's training, from other AIs, and it's, oh, this is good.
If you have cheese falling off your pizza, just put glue on it and problem solved.
Exactly.
Let's talk about dev culture now, guys. This will be for Dustin. Do you think secure applications start with culture?
I do. I was saying before, I think culture is a huge element here. But let's talk about the life cycle of creating a product, piece of code, etc. I don't think you necessarily even start thinking with security. I think that, if you're coming up with a prototype, if you're coming up with a new technology, new design, etc., the first priority is to make it work, right? Is to build something that's actually going to build your business and be valuable for your business. The problem is that people don't come back around, and once it works and they've proven that it works, build in security and controls, right, to ensure that you're protecting your company and this product from risk. I think that's all cultural. I do think that in order to really have a good culture that thinks about security, you have to approach it methodically, meaning setting a vision, right? Setting goals, setting very specific things that you'd like to see across your organization. We were talking about governance earlier being a cultural thing as much as it is a policy thing, probably even more than a policy thing. And you have to be intentional about that, right? So not only setting goals, but figuring out ways to influence, ideally from the top down, from leaders, to show people what is the right way to act, and also incentivizing people for acting the right way. Not just, please, can you, not submit, our proprietary data to the AI assistant, whatever that is, but making some sort of incentive, right, to do so or to not do so. I think that's extremely important. At the end of the day, we are all human. And I think a lot of the things that we're going to see over time come down to the same human psychology that's been around for thousands of years. It's just a matter of understanding human behavior and reacting accordingly.
I think one of the things that key in there too is, how do you build culture? There's a couple different ways we think about that, right? There's how do you incentivize, how do you enable. One of the things that I like to drive home the most, and I think it's the most important, one of the most important for AI, is making security simple, making security the easy path, right? As our job, right? To enable the developers to do their job securely. What I can't do is give them hurdles. I can't make things harder. The harder I make things, the less chance that they're going to adopt, the less chance I'm going to get that acceptance of, like, hey, I've educated you. Okay, now I know it's important, but you've made it impossible for me to get out the door, right? So even though I know the importance, doesn't mean I'm going to do it. Maybe not, because I still need to get out the door, right? So it's figuring out, how do we align our security initiatives to meet the developers where they're at, like Dustin said earlier, and make it as easy as possible that this is just part of your workflow. As I go in and I'm using AI tools, the AI tools themselves, which a lot of them have changed and done now, mark their own code as this was AI generated code. So it's automatically done. The developer doesn't have to think about segmenting that. The AI tool itself is marking itself in the pull request and saying, hey, this is AI generated code. Leave these comments in here when you push it up so other people know that too. So you have that traceability of what was written by AI, and it's the ethically correct thing to do. But those type of solutions where we can make it where the developer doesn't have to think, they don't have to take extra steps, and we build it into their normal workflows. That's how we're going to get these culture changes, because they're like, oh, this makes sense. I'm doing it. And now it's part of my daily routine. I don't have to think about it. That's when my cultures change, when I can take an action and it's just the natural action to take and I don't have to think about it.
Yeah. Well, and when you look at the culture, there's a couple of things that came to mind as you guys were talking. First off, companies, larger ones, should have clubs, AI clubs, and different things that encourages the usage and the different aspects of it. And the security team should be helping to lead that, not just from a development standpoint, but have a developer and a security guy leading these kind of clubs. Because when you have that kind of thing happening within your environment, and if it's on-prem, your developers are going to show up. They're going to be there. They're going to learn. They're going to see all the cool things. The thing that's really fun about my talks is all the interesting conversations that happen. The Q&A usually goes for an hour to 2 hours after the 45-minute talk. And that's just because people's thoughts are starting to come out and they have questions. And when you have a culture of growth and enablement, then all of a sudden now you have people starting to have great ideas. Why do we have Cursor, Windsurf, and the other tools we have today? Is because they came out of the concept of, well, let me do prompting, and then you prompt your way into something. Now the tools are starting to kind of fill some of that gap. And to your point, Michael, it is going out and it's starting to label this code was generated by this, and it even tracks it within the tools themselves. And so really, when you look at the culture AI is creating is it's an environment that really wants to become inclusive. I want you to use AI. I want it to be part of your daily driver. The developers are very happy with it. Security guys are scared to death because they don't really understand what's happening. And again, when I talk, I ask how many are you developers' hands, how many are you security hands, and you can read their faces when I do my talk because it's very development heavy, but it really goes over a lot of things that the security folks need to know. And when you watch their faces throughout the talk, you can see that, they understand what I'm talking about. And I always bring it way up so they can understand. But when they're looking at this, they're like, wow, I didn't realize the code is clean. The code is good. It looks right. However, there's all these gaps. I mean, SQL injection. One of the examples that I have, AI actually creates a regex to say, is the SQL injection? That's not the right way to do it. And the problem is when people are using AI, they're going, hey, look, is this good? It's good.
Yeah.
That's
and they don't know what they don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I see a lot of culture honestly being born of the path of least resistance. So it's like trying to steer a river. You can't just put a dam in the middle of it. I mean, you can try, and then, it's going to be hard to build, and then see how long that lasts after you're done working on it. But if you can make people's jobs easier with or without these tools, that's probably the right way to go. Some of the best companies, because I do a lot of cybersecurity consulting, and some of the best companies that I've worked with, they have, here's a specific way that you have to do this. In development terms, we use patterns, right? There are specific development patterns. And what I like about that is that you can put automated tests together. You can do checks in your CI/CD pipeline in order to say, if you're not doing it this way, it's wrong. I don't care if it's as good. I don't care if it's even in some cases better. If you're not doing it this way, it's wrong. That way developers only need to focus on one thing and they don't need to worry about patchworking stuff. I did a test on an application not too long ago that tried to roll their own crypto, right? How long have we been saying don't roll your own crypto?
Right.
So, hey.
Well, AI can build it for me now.
Right, exactly. AI can build better crypto, right? AI is smart. I saw that it passed a whole bunch of tests. It's in Mensa now,
Sure.
all this.
Sure.
Blah, blah, blah. And I think that when it comes to building culture, finding a path of least resistance and saying, hey, these are the only appropriate ways that you can use this stuff. Here are some examples on how to use this stuff. Try to be more positive instead of don't do that. I think that's really going to go a long way in developing a long-term culture around some of this stuff, because ultimately what you want to do is get the populace, the company, the people to buy into this, so that as you onboard new people, they can help police each other.
Yeah, this is about change. I mean, you mentioned patterns. The way to transform culture, the way to transform people is actually pretty well understood, right? There's organizational change management. When I think of change, I'm going to go back to actually the book that I'm reading, right? Crossing the Chasm. I think about the technology adoption life cycle. This is how new innovations and products catch on. You need initial allies is what it comes down to. And of course, I'm going to talk about security champions. This is one of my favorite topics. But you need people who are going to understand the changes that you're trying to make when it comes to your culture, get on board with them, and then you work closely with those allies to help them understand. You essentially bring them into the inner circle. You work closely with them, you educate them, et cetera, and then they become voices for your cause. And that would, over time, get you to cross the chasm, essentially, to reach the majority of the rest of the people of your company. That is the way to go about culture change at a very high strategic level.
Well, that was a great conversation. Thanks to all our panelists for your thoughtful input and sharing your expertise. Thanks to Security Journey, and thank you to everyone for watching.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Appreciate it. Thank you, everybody.